November 20th, 1943. Tarawa Atoll, Gilbert Islands. The sun rose like molten copper over the Pacific. The sea was calm, deceptively calm, a glassy expanse stretching toward the thin strip of land called Betio, the main island of Tarawa Atoll. Beyond the breakers, hundreds of U.S. Marines crouched inside their landing craft, sweat trickling down their necks despite the dawn. On the bridge of the USS Zealand, Lieutenant Colonel David M. Shoup, commander of the 2nd Marine Regiment, leaned over a chart. "That reef's too shallow for the Higgins boats," he muttered. "We'll have to send in the Alligators first." The Alligators, officially LVT-1s, landing vehicle, tracked, were experimental amphibious machines, half boat, half tank. They looked ungainly, with boxy hulls and steel treads instead of propellers. A few months earlier, even U.S. engineers had called them death traps. The Japanese, confident behind their coral defenses, mocked the idea of a tracked vehicle crossing the reef. But that morning, as the sun climbed higher and the bombardment ships fell silent, the Alligators began to move. From the horizon, a line of LVTs churned toward the island, their twin Cadillac engines growling like beasts. Water foamed beneath their tracks as they left the safety of the transports and headed straight for the reef. Inside, Marines clutched their rifles, green helmets bouncing with each jolt. "Keep your heads down," shouted Sergeant William McLeod, gripping the hatch rim as the spray whipped across his face. "We hit that reef. We keep going." Ahead, Japanese gunners waited in reinforced bunkers, hidden under palm fronds and concrete. Their commander, Lieutenant Takeo Sugai, peered through binoculars. He saw the American fleet, the smoke, the endless waves, but not the danger below the surface. When the first Higgins boats hit the coral, they stopped dead. Stuck fast, their ramps dropped too far from shore. Marines spilled into chest-deep water, wading 500 yards under machine gun fire. It was slaughter. But then, something impossible happened. The Alligators didn't stop. They climbed the reef like it was solid ground, treads biting into coral, steel hulls shrugging off the surf. They roared right over the reef and into the lagoon beyond, where Japanese gunners had thought no machine could go. "Holy hell," a gunner whispered on a nearby ship. "They're walking on water." On the beach, Lieutenant Sugai froze as the first LVTs reached the sand. 50 tons of American steel grinding up from the surf. Their mounted .50 caliber Brownings opened up, cutting down Japanese machine nests. Men who had prepared for infantry found themselves facing armored monsters instead. From inside one vehicle, Sergeant McLeod yelled into the intercom, "Hit the bunker at 12 o'clock." The gunner fired short bursts. Palm logs exploded, and the bunker collapsed in a cloud of dust and flame. Marines leapt from the back ramps, wading ashore behind their armored transports. Within minutes, the impossible had become reality. American armor on Tarawa. As smoke and chaos swallowed the beach, Shoup radioed from his command craft, his voice grim but steady. "We're in. The Alligators made it." From the bunkers, survivors of the 7th Sasebo Special Naval Landing Force could only stare, stunned as the floating tanks crawled over the sand and drove straight into their defenses. That morning, the legend of the LVT was born, and the myth of the impassable Pacific Reef died under its treads. Fire and Steel on Betio, November 21st, 1943. Tarawa Atoll, Gilbert Islands. The second day dawned over a nightmare. Smoke clung to the lagoon like fog, and the stench of burning oil and cordite turned the air into poison. On the beach at Betio, The first waves of Marines huddled behind wrecked LVTs, using the steel carcasses as cover. The coral sand was littered with the dead, American and Japanese alike. From the inland bunkers, Japanese defenders still held their ground, their Type 92 heavy machine guns firing in long, unbroken bursts. They had expected the Americans to come piecemeal, drowned on the reef or shredded on the sand. What they hadn't expected were the alligators. "Report from Red Beach 2, came the radio crackle aboard the USS Maryland offshore. "The LVTs are still running, requesting more ammo and reinforcements." Lieutenant Colonel David Shoup, limping from shrapnel, crouched behind an overturned vehicle, his map soaked with seawater. "Tell them the tanks will follow the LVTs in," he growled. "They've opened the door. Now we kick it in." Inland, Sergeant William McLeod's LVT-2, Marianne, ground forward, its treads chewing through barbed wire and mangled palm trunks. The engine coughed and groaned, but the amphibious vehicle, built originally to rescue hurricane victims in Florida, now clawed its way across a battlefield designed to stop everything but it. Inside the cramped hull, the men were deaf from the racket. Bullets pinged off the armor like hail. The driver yelled over the din, "We're taking fire from the airstrip." "Ignore it, straight ahead," McLeod barked. Through a haze of smoke, they could see the concrete seawall, the main Japanese line. Behind it were pillboxes with firing slits, each one hiding a machine gun crew or a mortar team. Normally, infantry would have been cut to ribbons before reaching that line. But the Alligator didn't stop. Its tracks clattered against the wall and then, impossibly, began to climb. Sparks showered as steel met concrete. The men inside braced themselves, hearts hammering. "Come on, girl. Come on," McLeod muttered. The LVT crested the wall, nose first, and crashed down into the trench beyond. The Marines cheered inside, even as the gunner swung his .30 caliber into position and unleashed a storm of lead down the trench line. Japanese defenders tried to flee, but the Alligator turned and ground forward, crushing machine gun nests under its weight. Across the beachhead, other LVTs followed, some burning, some half-sunk. Their crews fought until the engines seized or the ammunition ran dry. Every few yards, another Marine squad poured off a ramp, charging through the smoke toward the airstrip. By afternoon, the Alligators were scattered across Betio like broken toys. But they had done their job. Behind them, Sherman M4A2 Amtraks rolled ashore from LSTs, crossing the same reef that had once doomed entire assaults. The Japanese, their positions flanked and shattered, fought to the last man. Inside his shattered bunker, Lieutenant Takeo Sugai coughed blood and disbelief. The Americans' new machines had done the impossible. Vehicles swimming the surf, climbing reefs, crawling over fortifications. He whispered to his adjutant before the end. "We thought they were fools. But these Alligators, they are demons of the sea." 3 days later, Tarawa fell silent. Only 17 of the 4,800 Japanese defenders were captured alive. For the U.S. Marines, it was a victory bought in blood. But for the engineers watching from the fleet, it was proof. The LVT had changed amphibious warfare forever. And in less than a year, it would return, faster, heavier, and deadlier, at a place called Saipan. The Steel Tide at Saipan, June 15th, 1944. Saipan, Mariana Islands. The Pacific was alive with thunder. From horizon to horizon, the ocean boiled under the wakes of 1,000 ships. The U.S. Fifth Fleet, over 500 vessels strong, gathered for the largest amphibious assault yet attempted in the Pacific. Over the ship's intercom, The voice of Vice Admiral Raymond Spruance echoed calmly. "This is the main gate to Japan. We go in hard, and we don't come out." Below deck aboard the USS Sheridan, Marines of the 2nd and 4th Divisions sat shoulder to shoulder beside their new beasts. The LVT-2 Water Buffalo and its armored brother, the LVT-A-4. Unlike the early models at Tarawa, these machines now carried 75mm howitzers and 37mm cannons in turrets, true amphibious tanks. Sergeant William McLeod, the veteran who had lived through Tarawa's slaughter, ran his hand over the steel hull of his new LVT-A-4, Ironfish. Its armor bore the scars of training rounds. "She's prettier than the Mary Ann ever was," he muttered, grinning, "and twice as mean." At 8:45 hours, the sea erupted with naval gunfire. Battleships like the USS Tennessee and USS California rained shells onto Saipan's beaches. Palm trees vanished, bunkers exploded, and black smoke rolled inland. But the Marines knew what awaited: deep bunkers, fortified ridges, and reefs designed to trap landing craft, just as at Tarawa. Then the order came. Amphibious tractors launched the first wave. McLeod's LVT rumbled down the ramp, plunging into the surf. The water hissed up over the bow. Around him, hundreds of alligators surged forward in formation, a line of metal beasts crawling over the waves. From Saipan's shores, Major Yoshitsugu Saito, commander of the island's garrison, watched in disbelief through binoculars. "Landing craft cannot cross the reef," he said confidently to his staff. "The Americans will be trapped there, as before." But the reef never stopped them. The alligators climbed it, clawing over coral as if it were gravel. Japanese artillerymen, stunned by the sight, hesitated for crucial seconds. Then the LVTs were upon them, guns blazing, their 50 caliber Brownings hammering through the smoke. McLeod shouted over the roar of the engines, "Targets at 1 o'clock, take 'em down!" His gunner opened fire, the heavy barrels shuddering with each burst. Japanese infantry fell back into trenches, their machine guns useless against the moving armor. Shells splashed around the advancing column, but the LVTs kept coming, crossing the reef, the surf, and into the lagoon, unstoppable. A Marine observer aboard the cruiser USS Birmingham watched through field glasses. "They're walking right over the ocean," he said in awe, "straight onto the beach." By mid-morning, the first wave of Marines was ashore. Behind them, the alligators rolled up the sand and over the sea wall, firing into caves and pillboxes. The Japanese defense line, meticulously planned for traditional landing craft, crumbled. Major Saito's radio filled with frantic reports. "Enemy tanks in the lagoon. They're climbing the seawall. Our guns cannot depress low enough to hit them." From his command post, Saito stared toward the coast. Through the haze, he saw them. Dozens of amphibious vehicles crawling inland, their guns flashing like fireflies. "Impossible," he whispered. "They drive from the sea itself." By sunset, Marines had secured a foothold 2 miles deep. The alligators had carried men, supplies, and firepower across terrain once considered impenetrable. Where the Japanese had prepared for drowning men, they faced armored machines that swam, crawled, and killed with mechanical precision. As night fell over Saipan, McLeod and his crew sat beside their idling LVT, the engine ticking like a heartbeat. In the darkness, he looked out toward the still-burning sea. "They laughed at us in the beginning," he said quietly, "but the alligator just keeps coming." The next morning, Saipan would become a slaughterhouse. But the Marines were ashore, and the island's fate was sealed. Demons from the Sea, June 16th, 1944. Saipan, Mariana Islands. The morning broke under a canopy of black smoke. The air smelled of oil, blood, and salt. Across the beaches of Charankanoa, the once white sand was now a churned mess of shell holes, burned-out LVTs, and bodies. The Japanese had recovered from the initial shock, and they were furious. From the inland cliffs, Major General Yoshitsugu Saito watched the chaos through his field glasses. His once confident expression had hardened into disbelief. "They came from the sea," he muttered, his voice trembling. "Tanks. From the sea." Around him, staff officers scrambled for composure, radioing artillery batteries and shouting orders over the roar of battle. "Bring every gun to bear. Crush the invaders before they reach the airfield." Below, the U.S. 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions were fighting tooth and nail to expand the beachhead. The LVTs, those ungainly amphibians that the Japanese had mocked as toys, were now the backbone of the assault. They ferried ammunition and wounded under fire, and when the enemy counterattacked, they became bunkers on treads. Sergeant William McLeod's LVT A-4 Iron Fish sat dug in near the edge of the sugarcane fields, its turret blackened from yesterday's fight. Through his periscope, McLeod could see the Japanese infantry massing in the distance. "Here they come again," he said flatly. A whistle blew. Then came the screaming. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers surged from the tree line, a banzai charge, bayonets glinting, grenades in hand. Mortars whined overhead. Marines along the ridge opened fire, but the wave didn't stop. McLeod gritted his teeth. "Get that turret moving! Give 'em hell!" The 75mm howitzer barked, once, twice, 3 times. Each shell exploded in the thick of the charge, tearing gaps through the ranks. The .50 caliber gun roared nonstop, tracers cutting fiery arcs through the smoke. Japanese soldiers fell by the dozens, but others leapt onto the LVT, trying to pry open hatches or shove grenades through gun slits. One Marine inside yelled, "They're on top of us!" McLeod kicked open the hatch and fired his sidearm point blank before slamming it shut again. The Iron Fish rocked under the blasts, but kept firing. Its armor was scarred, its paint scorched, yet it refused to stop. Around it, other Alligators fought the same desperate battle, their hulls bristling with Marines firing rifles from the decks. From the cliffs, Saito's artillery began to fall short, shells crashing into his own front lines. His radio screamed with static and panicked reports, "Our guns cannot stop them. The enemy vehicles are in the cane fields." Through the haze, Saito could see them. Lines of amphibious tanks crawling through the mud, unstoppable. "So, the Alligator returns," he murmured, bitterly remembering Tarawa. "Even the ocean cannot hold them back." By afternoon, the counterattack was broken. The Japanese left thousands dead across the fields. The Alligators pressed forward, dragging supplies and wounded men even as shells burst around them. When the firing finally ceased, McLeod climbed out of his vehicle, ears ringing. The air was heavy with the smell of death and diesel. A young Marine walked past, wide-eyed. "Never thought I'd see a tank swim," he said, voice trembling. McLeod managed a weary grin. "Hell, son. Out here everything swims if it has to." By evening, the Marines had pushed inland toward Aslito Airfield. The road to the heart of Saipan lay open, and behind every yard gained, the Alligators rumbled forward, scarred, smoking, and indestructible. For the Japanese defenders, it was a nightmare made real. The floating tanks they had mocked as impossible now owned both the sea and the land. And soon they would bring that terror to every island left standing between America and Japan. July 6, 1944. northern Saipan. The island was dying. The palm groves that had once swayed green under Pacific winds were now nothing but splintered stumps. The air reeked of smoke, blood, and rot. From the shattered cliffs above Tanapag, the remnants of General Yoshitsugu Saito's garrison made their final stand. Below them, the American flag waved over a ruined airfield, and the sound of engines echoed once again across the shattered coral. Down on the coastal plain, Sergeant William McLeod's LVT-4 Iron Fish rolled forward with the rest of the amphibious armor company. Its hull was streaked with salt and mud. Its crew hadn't slept in 2 days. McLeod stared ahead through his periscope. Through the heat, through the smoke, through the ghosts of Tarawa, he'd survived all of it. And now, the Alligator was leading the charge one last time. "Orders from battalion, Sarge," his gunners shouted over the intercom. "We push to the cliffs. Clear any pockets along the road." "Roger that," McLeod said, gripping the hatch rim. "Let's end this thing." The LVTs advanced in a line, their 75mm howitzers pounding Japanese bunkers carved into the hills. Infantry followed in their wake, Marines of the 2nd Division moving in the shadow of the Alligators. Every few yards, the vehicles stopped to disgorge wounded men or haul fresh ammunition forward. The Alligator had become more than a machine. It was lifeline, fortress, ambulance, and tank rolled into one. As the Marines closed in on the cliffs, Saito's remaining troops launched their final act of defiance, the largest banzai charge of the Pacific War. Thousands of Japanese soldiers, wounded, starving, some armed only with bayonets, poured down the slopes in a screaming tide. "Incoming!" shouted McLeod. "Cut 'em down!" The Iron Fish fired shell after shell into the mass, its turret glowing red-hot. The .50 caliber gun barked until the barrel smoked. Around them, the other LVTs formed a steel wall, their gunners firing non-stop, turning the charge into chaos. Marines on foot stood shoulder to shoulder behind the Alligators, pouring rifle and bar fire into the onrushing line. The sound was a single, endless roar, gunfire, explosions, screams, until the field went silent. When it was over, more than 4,000 Japanese soldiers lay dead in front of the Marine lines. The battle for Saipan was finished. That evening, McLeod climbed onto the deck of his scarred LVT and looked toward the horizon. Beyond Saipan lay Tinian, then Guam, and beyond those, the Philippines. And finally, Japan itself. The Alligator would be there for every one of them. From 1943 to 1945, the LVT family evolved. From the crude, unarmored Alligators of Tarawa to the turreted amphibious tanks of Saipan and Okinawa. They ferried tens of thousands of Marines through surf, reef, and fire, redefining how nations waged war from the sea. Even Japanese engineers, once derisive, took note. After the war, captured officers admitted their disbelief at Tarawa and Saipan. One wrote in his diary, "We built walls for men. We never imagined tanks could swim." In 1945, as American forces closed on Japan's home islands, naval planners looked at the endless Pacific and realized what had made their victories possible. Not just courage, not just numbers, but innovation. Machines that broke the laws of the sea. When the guns finally fell silent, the Alligators were pulled ashore one last time, rusted, dented, and battered beyond repair. But for the men who rode them, they weren't just machines. They were salvation. Years later, at a veterans reunion, McLeod stood beside a museum display, a restored LVT-4, its olive paint gleaming under the lights. He reached out and touched the steel, tracing the welded seams with his calloused fingers. They laughed at her once. he said quietly. Called her a joke. But she carried us through hell. He stepped back, eyes misting. She walked on water, he whispered. And she never let us down. The Alligator, born in swamps, baptized in blood, and forever remembered as the machine that carried the U.S. Marines across the Pacific.